Hey, I'm back again. Still no normal video, but I was pretty pumped that the Foam News Collective was kind enough to mention these unedited rambles I've been doing. And KT was saying Family Foam Sport that there was some stuff that resonated, and I bet it would amongst. I can think of a lot of people I'm sure it would resonate with when you are down that YouTube path and collector path and all of that. So if you haven't seen any of those videos, you can check those out. I think I'm going to make a playlist just called Do I Vlog? Or Nerf Vlogs or something, if I haven't already. I just wanted to chat tonight. A few people did mention, because I think I might make these things that people can ask what they want to hear about, and I'll just talk a bit about it. People were asking about my party business and running parties and some stuff about that. And I would love to talk a little bit about that. And I actually think that is something that maybe I could do that is a bit different. It's always hard to find things that are different when you're YouTubing in a niche space. There's a lot of us that review blasters. There's a lot of us that mod blasters. I'm not the best at either of those things that I'm saying, but I do have a lot of fairly unique experience. Not totally unique. There's other people that run parties and events and stuff too, but I do have some unique experience as far as the running parties and corporate events and things like that. So I thought I would talk about that a bit and just be really open about what I charge when I do it, kind of what my mindset is when I'm setting prices, etc. I started doing parties really as a way to justify my ever-growing collection during COVID, during the part of COVID that was kind of a bit more, it was starting to get a little bit looser. You could do some gathering to limited degrees. There was masks inside, etc. Kind of when it was getting like, and I totally supported doing what needed to be done. But there was that period towards the end where it was like the rules were kind of not making a whole lot of sense. But you just did it because you didn't want to feel bad and get an older relative or someone who's immunocompromised sick. So we did the weird things. And one of the weird things was like you could get a bunch of kids together for a birthday party, but they all had to wear masks, but they're all just like sweating and being gross through the masks. Anyway, so I did my very first party. A friend of mine that I worked with, she asked me if I'd ever consider doing a party. I did one for her. I did it, pretty cheap. I think it was, I said, oh, I'll charge you $200. And she's like, yeah, that sounds great. And I kind of went overboard because I wanted it to be really good. I was using wooden pallets at the time for barriers, and I took those all out to her house, and she had like a wooded area behind her house. So I set those up there. I actually have a video on my YouTube channel of that party. And I took out a bunch of blasters and laid them all out, and I had inflatable barriers. And it was a lot of fun. It went over really well. I had a proton pack from Out of Darts with the Jupiter, and I had what was called the Booth of Pain. The kids could take turn firing the proton pack into their friends. That was something we did after the battle. So super fun. I was like, okay, this is fun. I made like a little 1-minute video that she could send around to some of her friends to kind of spread the word. And I did a bunch of parties, admittedly kind of just for friends and friends of friends. I didn't really have insurance for doing parties at that point. Not the wisest thing, but it's a little. There's not as much suing for everything you have in Canada as there is in the U.S. But even still, it wasn't a smart thing to have done. But I don't know, when you're starting something small. Anyway. Look at me with this video proof of that on here. Is that a bad thing? I don't know. Anyway, I did a few parties like that. I did some in some school gyms, and then I did some parties at some gyms and events where they had liability insurance and things like that as part of their venue. So that was, so that kind of took some of that stress off when I did those at some of those other venues, which was great. So yeah, I quickly realized with all the time it takes to pack up the blasters, and it's not like at the time I had a dedicated bunch of blasters just for parties. I was kind of pulling from my ever-growing collection. So it was a lot of work to like bin everything up and kit everything and transport it. And I realized after one battle that that wooden pallets were not the way. They're just too heavy, and they kind of got splintery. They were probably not the safest either. So I built some PVC and tarp barriers, and I had some of those kind of Nerf branded inflatables that aren't quite big enough for adults, but they're not too bad for kids. They're even kind of small for kids. But I had a bunch of those, and you know what? If I put all that up in a gym, it looked pretty good. I moved my party pricing, I think at one point 250, which is still too low in Canadian, to like 300. I think now if I do a party on site for somebody, it's like 300. It varies a little bit by person. I usually say parties are whatever my rate is. Let's say it's 275. And I'm not being coy. I don't remember. You know, once you try not to change your prices too much, but I did kind of incrementally grow it over time, just realizing like, I'm not charging enough for the amount of time going into this. You know, it might only be a party for an hour and a half or so, but I'm spending 8 hours of my day packing up, setting up, running the party, tearing down, packing back up, and then onloading stuff. But I think right now it's around 275, 300. If it's more than 10, there's kind of a fee per extra kid. I'm never a big jerk about that. If it's one extra kid or like the brother of someone comes, I don't sweat it. If it's just kind of like an honest thing like that. If parents want to jump in and play, generally that makes my life easier. I don't get too bent out of shape if there's kind of too much extra. But generally I do, try to do the business thing of, if there are more than there are supposed to be, I charge a little bit more. So, in the end, it wasn't too bad. It was a good way to make a little bit of extra money, especially help with, buying all those blasters and review blasters and parts and all the things for modding. And it was fun. I would say I actually enjoyed it. I enjoyed doing that. So I kind of ran that doing parties remotely. And it's funny, that is definitely probably the most profitable way. Once you get the overhead of a space, I was actually talking to someone who ran a lot of parties at Kidtropolis. That's a cool venue. Look it up. I thought they owned part of the venue or it was a permanent home, but it's not. They just do a lot of parties there. This other company, and I'm so sorry I can't remember their name, but I'm doing this off the cuff. We chatted a bit, and I was talking at the time about getting a dedicated space and trying to build a little town that people could battle in, that I could, maybe do gel and Nerf parties. And they really advised, they're like, don't go into the overhead of that. And I was like, I don't know. Like, I'd like to have a space. Maybe it could also be a studio, which I do think that could have still been valid, but just not in the right place for my life for that. I'd really have to be at a place where I was quitting my job and doing this full time in order to make having a venue for battles and a YouTube space and creator space and everything. It was just a level of commitment that I wasn't looking to do, and I don't know that I would get there, sadly, unless I surprisingly shoot up to hundreds of thousands of subscribers overnight. Probably this will never be my full-time job. So anyway, I digress. I ran a lot of parties remotely, anywhere from 250 to maybe 300, maybe 350, again, depending on the size of the party. I found the sweet spot for parties was around 10 kids. Anything more gets a little unwieldy. I tried not to have an assistant or a helper to just make it more profitable. And, you get much bigger than that, you need help. I always had no shame and no problem with asking kids to help me clean up for cleaning up darts. Parents were always pretty good, and parents never mind getting the kids to help or clean up. I think they understood that it makes it cheaper for them too. If I had to have someone else there just to pick up darts, and plus it's not a bad concept for kids to have to help. Anyway, so that always went pretty well. I also would charge a lost dart fee if I did parties outside, which was kind of another way to be able to like reasonably tack on a little extra, knowing that I was going to lose a bunch of darts, especially in the outdoors or in the woods. So, okay, so that's kind of chapter one. I'm looking at the time, I'm at 9 minutes. Oh, wow. So then I did, with my ex-girlfriend, have a little arena. A lot of you have seen videos for in there where, if I ran a party, I certainly didn't make as much. It was kind of a revenue split with the cafe for the the space, and they had, the overhead of food and stuff like that. I don't want to go into the D as much as I want to be candid. I don't want to go into the details because that's their business. My ex and her business partner are not really mine to speak about. But obviously, I did parties. I got something. I didn't get everything because they needed some revenue for their costs because there was food, the space it was in, etc. So yeah, I won't go too much into that detail. But parties there, I will say, up to 20 right now, as of right now, up to 20 kids can have a party for $350 Canadian, and that includes food and drinks. It is a heck of a deal. It's an hour and a half of time and someone running the party. It is not usually me these days, but there is someone who knows what they're doing, running that party and event. So then from there, I've also done a few corporate events and community events. For corporate events, a lot of those I've traveled to maybe another city to do. So, you're charging mileage. Unlike when I started doing parties using blasters where I would try to have a wide assortment of blasters, I have over time consolidated a little bit, eliminated anything with mags. Front loaders are key. I've joked before that the X-Shot Reflex 6 is one of the best blasters ever for kids' parties. But obviously you want to give kids the excitement of using bigger and crazier blasters. But for corporate parties, community events, and for all parties, I did simplify the loadout to a lot of front loaders, a lot of regular blasters for smaller kids. Once you get up to 12, 13, 14, you get in a rival area. Now I'm kind of experimenting with just using N series for both to kind of simplify that loadout, and doing even more duplication of blasters, which is something I always intended to avoid. But boy, you spend enough hours trying to get a whole group of kids or adults up to speed on how to play, and you realize you got to consolidate your blasters so you're only explaining 1 or 2 blasters as opposed to 10. Even for the corporate gigs, I definitely tried to use, I did all rival. The last corporate gig I did, was around, I charged around $1,100. And it was, I earned it for sure. I mean, it was, they were great. I won't go into who it was, because I've done a few, but the very last one, they were great. But I had a long day of travel, a long day of setup, a long day of refereeing and going over things, a long day of tear down and all my travel home and putting things away. So it really depends on what you're doing for sure. I'm always happy if you run something like this and you want to reach out to me and be like, is this cost crazy, do you think? I'm happy to weigh in and help you. Community events are always tricky too, because I definitely, if I do those, I don't do them at the same cost as corporate events. Probably, what I might charge a larger corporation $1,000 for, maybe for a community event, it might even be half. And I don't mind saying that. I don't think any good corporation would be super offended by that, especially if it's a town council or something like that, and volunteers putting together a community thing. I'm usually try to be pretty flexible about that. The last one I did, there's quite a few hours of playing and organizing, and I actually took some time off work to do it too, so you got to factor all that stuff in. Most people are pretty reasonable that you have to charge for your time. Time does cost something. I try to be reasonable, and my experience is other people have been reasonable too. And if someone really scoffs at something that you feel is a fair value or price, then you probably don't want that business. It's kind of cliche, but it's also true. Or they're just not the right fit. Or maybe you're not in it enough to do enough volume to kind of get your prices down. I'm kind of over for time. I didn't do the best job on this one, but I'll probably think that about all these videos. This was more of a cost point of view. I'm looking into some insurance now. I was covered for insurance under there's coverage for insurance under the cafe business where the parties are now. But I'm looking into my own for some future stuff, and for, just to have more flexibility of where I can do things and not just rely on the insurance at specific venues. So, you always want waivers. You always want to know, you need to look into the insurance a bit. Don't be afraid to ask the venue or ask the person asking you about the event, hey, does this venue, do you have a contact there? Can I talk to them? Is it okay to do this event there? Would I be covered under what they do? Do I need to have my own insurance? Check all that stuff out. As I learn more, I'm happy to answer questions on that. I'm not much of an expert. I've kind of leaned on the insurance of other venues and companies that I've worked with more than having my own thus far. So that's an area for me to kind of grow and learn a bit more. So as far as it's probably going to be a whole other video. I could even talk again about just what blasters you use for parties, but boy, stay away from magazines, I guess, if I could say anything. I could probably do a whole video on how There'd be a really good argument for when you're doing just casual parties and casual events, if they were outside, to just use gel. Because boy, at least you're putting everything in the same shaped hoppers. There's a lot more similar things, but I don't know. That doesn't thrill me as much. I see a lot of gel ball businesses popping up, and I wish them well, but it just doesn't give me the same, personally, the sense of fun. But to probably a lot of kids and adults, they would enjoy it just as much in a casual way. I think the real joy of Nerf stuff comes from doing it more than once and getting really into it. Anyway, well, this is kind of a weird way to end this one. I hope this was kind of interesting. Like I say, if you have questions, put them in the comments. If you have questions about if you're running events or you might run parties, your community is. I know I talk quite a bit with the 902 Foam folks. You know, they're smarter than me organizing their own stuff. But I mean, we've certainly talked a bit about just some of the challenges of forming clubs and groups. And clubs is a whole different thing, because you're in the Nerf community, mostly we're trying to not make it an expensive thing. And I've done free events in the past too, and I want to do more. But how do you balance that out with, bringing in some money just to fix what you use and stock new darts and all that stuff. So that's interesting. Community events maybe could be a whole separate thing. If you thought this was interesting, let me know. It's gotten really dark here. And put down below what you want me to ramble about next. And put those questions down there, and I'm going to stop talking, because I'm still going. All right.